Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to talk to you guys a bit about the new Soul Rot ability, which is the Night Fae Ardenweald Warlock-based Covenant ability that we've seen so far in Shadowlands Alpha. Now, this is indeed the second time it's come back around in Torghast. The first time, I unfortunately missed it and wasn't really able to make a video on it. However, this time I was able to do so, even though technically it is 5:15 in the morning. I figured, hey, let's try and get this video out to you guys. So, Soul Rot, a 40-yard range, 1.5-second cast affected by haste on a 1-minute cooldown. Wither away all life force of your current targets and up to 3 additional targets nearby, causing them to suffer 1,595 nature damage over 8 seconds. Now, first of all, I have to say this ability does indeed sort of seem a bit undertuned damage-wise there. A bit. I've already played with it a little bit on this floor of Torghast, but we'll get more into that in a second here when we pull some mobs. For the next 8 seconds, casting Drain Life will cause you to also drain life from any enemy affected by your Soul Rot, and Drain Life will not consume any mana. However, it does consume 20% of your maximum health when cast. So it's sort of like you have to be above 20% health to actually cast this, but for the most part, the life that you sacrifice you're going to get back relatively quickly if you're casting Drain Life on multiple targets. So it's pretty cool. Let's go see if we can find a mob or two that we can pull here. I can show you the actual animation. One of the first things that I want to point out here is that you're going to see when I send my Voidwalker into this pack here, there's a range on Soul Rot. Basically, the targets you hit, it's sort of like combust-ish. The mobs need to be pretty stacked on top of one another to actually have Soul Rot hit multiple targets. If I cast Soul Rot on one mob here and the other mobs are 7-8 yards off to the side, I don't believe Soul Rot's going to hit them. I'm pretty sure it has like a 5-6 or so yard range. But the cool thing here, as you can see, visually, it does indeed put out a max of 4 separate individual Drain Life graphics. It looks pretty awesome. As you can see, it's relatively easy to recoup the health you spend, the 20% you spend when casting the actual ability. I do also want to say, though, that those mall rats did die, those skeletons, I'm sorry, did die relatively quickly, but the ability overall does indeed seem a bit undertuned. Those mobs don't have a very large health pool, and we're also on the first floor of Torghast, so I sort of expected the ability to hit a bit harder, but I suppose it is one of those abilities that, hey, there's a lot to it. There's a dot you're putting out on anywhere from 1 to 4 targets, you're able to drain life from up to 4 targets, and there's a lot of tweaking and tuning that probably does indeed still need to happen there. So I guess in a sense it's sort of still to be expected, but as I mentioned, the big thing is that if the mobs aren't stacked, which happens a decent bit in Mythic Plus, you're going to not get max value out of Soul Rots, and it just depends, you know. It's on a pretty short CD, but numerically, regardless if it's a really powerful ability, if you can't get max value out of it, if there are certain casters in Torghast and some melee mobs and it's hard to bring most of them in or interrupt them, or you can't really stack all the mobs, Soul Rot does indeed lose a lot of its raw power. Now, as mentioned, I don't think it would be too hard to actually get max value out of Soul Rot in most settings like Mythic Plus, but the range does feel a tad limiting in its initial form. It just seems, I guess, lacking in power when compared to the first iterations we've had of Impending Catastrophe, the Night Fae Covenant ability, Decimating Bolt, the Maldraxxus ability, and Scouring Tithe, which is the Bastion Kyrian ability, which we got in the first wave of Shadowlands Alpha. Now, there are a few subtle little interactions here as well with Soul Rot that aren't really noticed until you play with it a bit more. So, you'll see in this poll here, notice that I actually cast Soul Rot on the 3 mobs behind me. However, then I run ahead and pull the mob in front, drain life the mob that does not have Soul Rot on it. I drain life from that mob, obviously, but the drain life does indeed hit the 3 targets behind me with Soul Rot on them as well. So there's some subtle little play there. You can Soul Rot a few mobs behind you. Maybe if the tank's trying to gather up a ranged mob or two, you're trying to kick it into melee, you can pop your Soul Rot on those 3 mobs and then drain life on the actual range mob that's a bit further out. So it sort of does give you a bit of leeway if there's a caster mob or a mob that's stuck shooting, like a marksman in freehold, something along those lines. It does give you a bit of play there when it comes to Soul Rot as a whole. Another interesting interaction here, and I want to make note that this is indeed alpha, and we are in Torghast, but the actual duration of the Soul Rot dot is 8 seconds. So it does sort of seem, and you can see it here in this clip as well, that you can cast Drain Life and get max value out of one drain, most value out of a second drain, depending on how long the channel actually is, and refresh your Drain Life. Go into another Drain Life before the Soul Rot dot falls, and get one full Drain Life on all the mobs still, even after the Soul Rot dot drops off of them. Now, once again, this might not be intended. It probably isn't intended. Let's be real here. Even Decimating Bolt was a bit buggy in Torghast. This is alpha, but there's a bit of play there as well. And as mentioned, I do think this ability is probably pretty undertuned from where it'll end up being when it goes live. But there are some subtle little interactions, tricks, and things you can do with it that do indeed make it more valuable. I don't want to use the word viable, but more relevant is a better way to put it, in a handful of settings. Now, I don't want to sound like a broken record or anything at this point, but I do want to reiterate this is indeed alpha, and there are going to be a lot of changes that come down the line before beta, and also throughout beta until Shadowlands actually goes live. Now that we've had the chance to see each Warlock Covenant ability, I do feel that Soul Rot probably has the most overall raw power in Mythic Plus, excluding the impending catastrophe utility that the Venthyr Covenant brings when it comes to Covenants, damage-wise. It's only a 1-minute CD that applies a short duration dot to multiple targets while also allowing you to cast Drain Life on all of them simultaneously. Now, it will indeed come down to tuning, obviously, as it's currently hitting like a wet noodle, it seems to me, especially when compared to the Venthyr Covenant ability. So we really just have to wait and see. Sadly, there really aren't any direct talent interactions with Soul Rot either, like there was for Decimating Bolt and Destruction with Fire and Brimstone, or Drain Soul for Affliction, but in the end, you know, what can you do? Soul Rot essentially does the same thing across every spec, but the actual effect in itself is a powerful one. It just depends on how powerful Blizzard wants to tune it in the end. Be sure to let me know what you think of Soul Rot visually as well as mechanically in the comment section below. I personally love the flavor of the spell, but I do feel there are probably going to be certain spots where you might just lose a bit too much value depending on polls or mob types, etc. Now that we've seen and been able to test with all 4 Warlock Covenant abilities, I plan on releasing a video covering each and giving my thoughts on each in different scenario later this week, so be sure to check back for that. Also, if you want to swing by my Twitch stream for more Shadowlands Alpha gameplay, I'll place a link in the description to that, where you can also grab all my weak auras and profiles for free if interested. Thanks guys, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.